together with me there is Arno van Heijsteen.
Hi, I'm the field CTO for Global Service Provider. And yeah, we're at Mobile World Congress this year, talking about all topics telco and all the innovative stuff going on with partners, like the 5G demos we're having here for mobile private network and the likes, right? What's interesting this year?
Yeah, I think that the biggest hype right now on the floor is the private mobile networks. A lot of people are talking about it. There are a lot of equipment manufacturers, but also software vendors from OpenRAN space, from like RUC, UDU, and so on. And we also have a demo set up with one of our partners from the OpenRAN space, which is basically running on Ubuntu and our technology to make the private 5G network open source based reality. So just to give you a brief introduction of different topics that we might be covering today. As Canonical, we are doing several things in the telco space. Like one big area is obviously the infrastructure. So not only the Ubuntu operating system, but as well products like OpenStack and Kubernetes, where we are basically helping with automation frameworks like Juju and Charms to be able to efficiently operate, not only on day one, but also day two story, and doing the efficient automation in that space. Another big area where we will be focusing on is basically making open source software consumable in telecom space. So what we are doing in that area is basically taking part in a lot of open source community projects around telecom. For example, let's take OSM, Etsy Open Source Model, where many people from Canonical are joining the community, and also we are contributing a lot of automation and operation code there. I'm also leading the VNF onboarding task force as part of the Etsy OSM. We're also doing a lot of work around other projects like EPC. This will be like Magma or OMEG and Open5GS. So basically, these are the types of engagements that we have, and we also have, last but not least, area of Edge and MEC. Arno?
Yeah, it's I think the industry is slowly adopting open source in the sense that they're comfortable with it. They're more comfortable with the notion of running production grade stacks on cloud and cloud-like infrastructure. We're seeing a lot of adoption, and just the natural evolution within the technology space means that they're asking questions around, I've built my data center, I've built my cloud, what's next for me? Obviously with radio technologies like OpenRAN coming along, these initiatives not force, but they make you think about how do you deal with the complexity of highly distributed compute pools. So for us, that topic of distributed compute or edge, MEC, a load of buzzwords in the industry, but essentially it comes down to how do you manage complexity at scale, and a lot of questions come up. How do I instantiate it? How do I stand these clusters up? How do you manage it? How do I lifecycle manage that entire I would say ecosystem of the types of substrates that you need to be able to host maybe today a 5G CUP solution with a UPF at the cell tower site, or OpenRAN solution with virtualized functions, and then what is tomorrow going to bring, right? So for us, that complexity, it opens up a number of good questions coming in from customers. We see a lot of customers interested in making sure that within their data center space that they have the ability, the tooling, the automation, lifecycle management events that can allow them to manage these data center type clouds. But also, can they extend that tooling? Can they use that commonality in tool sets all the way along to their smaller data center type needs, POP sites, or even distributed compute pools at the cell tower site, right? So OpenRAN brings obviously with it a lot of benefit, specifically around the 5G mobile network rollouts. And sorry, is there a problem?
The sound needs to be up, the microphone.
So obviously with 5G being one of the hype terms the last few years already, we see a lot more adoption now. A lot of testing and research has gone into the space. Enabling networks now to roll out at scale is one of the most important topics that we help customers with. Service providers the globe over are looking at the benefits of doing using some of the technology primitives within the 5G architectures to enable cost savings, right? To enable them to be able to adapt well to the types of demands that 5G will bring, right? Not only in terms of the network itself, but also in terms of the access to use cases that it will enable. And then I think about things like distributed compute, managing AI/ML workloads closer to the subscriber when the latency between the UE or the device and that type of use case processing needs to be sub-millisecond, right? Cases like robotics, drones, self-driving cars. I think in most of the cases where we help customers through that thought process in Edge, the same topics come back, right? I want to be able to instantiate something today. I want to be able to do it at scale. Anyone can stand up one Kubernetes cluster. Anyone can stand up a couple of servers at a cell tower site, but do this 1,000 times over. Do this at the same scale in certain countries with big geographic expanses that you need to cover, and you're quickly talking about complexity at the scale where automation is a fundamental need, right? So what do you think in terms of what you've seen at the Congress, the state of play, I would say the mentality towards orchestration, automation, and the appetite for customers to move into the space around RAN and NAC?
Yeah, I think that's like the appetite is really big. There are many companies from different parts of the world which are like starting in the OpenRAN space, and obviously like if they are experts in making the antennas and building up the solutions from like the physical layer or building the protocol stack of like PHY or MAC and so on, they are looking to the like IT specific companies to basically get the experience that they got previously building data centers, building public clouds and running big infrastructures, to embed it also in the OpenRAN space and make it really possible to be adopted also in that area, and also to use the consistent tooling. So everyone is asking the question about like, hey, there is a lot of automation already with my customers like telecom operators. How can I build in my OpenRAN solution to be able to hook it up to existing infrastructures? Like many operators have a private cloud based on either OpenStack or some like Kubernetes environments. How to connect my edge to it? That's the question.
Yeah, and we see a lot of customers in this space. It's very rare that we see Greenfield customers who are rolling out a completely new network. Obviously, those are unique opportunities, and in this day and age, if you have the ability to roll out a Greenfield network, the options are open, right? Like you could go really advanced. You can do all of the latest and greatest types of techniques. When you're choosing and selecting your different vendors to come in, you can use all of the buzzwords of the day, everything from microservices to orchestration, automation, elasticity, slicing, cups, all of these different, I would say, technology primitives. Unfortunately, 95%, 98% of our customer base are brownfields, and that's just the reality of the state of play in mobile telecommunication, right? Of the 960 odd mobile telcos out there, and then I'm talking purely about mobile telecommunication, mobile service provider, not even about all the fixed line operators or satellite operators or interconnect operators, just mobile telecommunication. They have a real need for the ability to manage both the assets that are still sweating within their networks, but also prepare for the future so that they are ready when they need to roll out the next technology, whether that's 5G or even at this Congress, I already hear people saying 6G. I think within the coming years, R&D efforts coming out of the big powerhouses will show that there is already an appetite to look at what's after what 5G, right? Like, so for those customers, brownfield situations, it inevitably means that you need to be able to manage a network service across your physical network functions that you still have in your network, more legacy type technology networks, maybe some virtualized networks, in multiple forms, right? You have either your own OpenStack environments or OpenStack environments from one of your vendors. But then beyond that, microservices and what's next, right? Now, in terms of workload orchestration, network function virtualization and placement, the orchestration of different workloads to be able to form a network service, it is of course important to ensure that you don't have to adopt a completely new tool set when you need to speak to a PNF versus, a physical network function versus a virtual network function instance or substrate, or a containerized workload function substrate, right? And I think that's where Canonical really plays with our history in open source. We've done a lot of work in the community. We believe that open source communities create value that can be consumed for its benefit, but can only be consumed if it is supportable, if it is secure, if it is repeatable, right? And that's really where we focus our energy and engineering prowess. We've done a lot of work on the automation part of this, where we abstract complexity through model-driven operations using open source frameworks like Juju, and all the preparation work we've done in the last 2 years, just preparing for the next wave of demands in workload placement through containerized workload placement towards substrates like Kubernetes. Juju is natively understands how to speak to an OpenStack substrate, a bare metal substrate, AWS substrates, but also Kubernetes substrates. And then the question is really like, do I keep consistent with the orchestration technology that I use, or do I select based on the use case? And I think most customers have come to the conclusion that if I can stay consistent, whether I have a hybrid cloud strategy, a on-prem only, a Kubernetes and OpenStack strategy, I think that's really the mindset that we see now, is that is, I think Juju has won in the sense that it enables a lot of customers to do really complicated things across multiple technology types, even though they're continuously evolving.
Okay, I think we are ready. There was a pretty long introduction, but we would like to invite you to ask your questions on the chat, and our help backstage here will let us know what's there, and we'll try to answer everything that you need to know about open source in telco.
Thank you very much, Arno and Maciek. The first question I have is open source ready to be used in real mobile network? What about security, stability, performance?
Okay, I think I can take that one. So that's a very broad question. Is open source ready? There are many different open source projects. Some of them are very mature and obviously ready to be used in a real mobile network, especially that not only us, but there are many companies on the market which are supporting open source projects. And obviously, like a freshly put code that was created yesterday and jump on GitHub is not something that you would like to put it in your main PLMN as a part of your core network. However, there are many really advanced projects which are already seeing a lot of use in telecom operators networks, but also even like private network solutions for the military or the places where the security is really the key, right? So,
yeah, I think the question is kind of wide, but this is what this session is all about. Like, ask me anything, right? I think over the last let's say just decade, since virtualization as a topic within telco became a real focus item through the work of Etsy and a couple of other initiatives, we seem to see that there was just like anything, there's an early adopter phase where people do R&D and they do a whole bunch of things in terms of trying to understand whether that technology can give them the benefits that they think it can give them, while the community continues to develop let's take OpenStack as an example, right? And obviously telco being telco, I would say we're a very traditionalist kind of mentality when it comes to evolving technology. We believe in things like standardization, resilience, security, and there's good reasons for that, right? The history has shown that telecommunication networks enable global economies, and it enables people to really connect the world over, right? So let's take open source adoption within that space, just virtualization. I think OpenStack's come a long way, community-wise, but also in terms of gaining the trust of the telco, right? To really adopt it and become that de facto standard when you have to build a compute environment, a cloud, and host multiple tenants there, right? I think a lot of people in the beginning, R&D wise, went ahead and tried to roll their own, right? They tried to build their own environments, figure it out themselves, and telcos being telcos, they always try to say, yeah, but it's not there yet, so I'm going to customize it just that little bit to make it special, to make it more feature rich, to make it whatever the need was at the time. And very quickly they saw that once they take upstream open source software, customized it a little bit, and they were stuck because they couldn't follow the evolution of the cadence of updates within the open source communities. I think mentality-wise, it takes a little bit of time to move away from the appliance proprietary software stacks into the mentality where you have to accept that a community is generating value through evolution path, and that you can consume that upstream value to host the workloads or cloud environments or types of functionality within a production stack at the right economics, right? You're only doing it because there should be benefits. You're not doing it for the sake of technology. So in the telco space, like any other, the evaluation phase always takes the longest. I usually say that when we work with telcos, sometimes they get into a state of analysis paralysis, right? Over-analyzing, trying to get it back to what they're comfortable with in terms of proprietary stacks with tons of documentation that has every perfect feature and feature set and config option before they decide to go. But those type of telcos have slowly learned, and sometimes the hard way, sometimes they got stuck and they decided this is not yet for them. But the innovators, the ones who did the early adoption, actually gained a lot of knowledge in terms of how do open source software stacks work, where do I get the support from that I'm used to when I'm buying it from a proprietary vendor, and what the values are, right? Like what are the valuable parts of open source software, what do I have to look out for? I think a very valid point in that question was around security, the ability to trust. Essentially, it comes down to, can I trust an open source piece of software for a production grade network and still have the ability to back off support into an organization with a decent engineering and security team that will ensure that my network is not at risk, right? A lot of mobile customers, mobile service providers host, I would say, business critical and government critical functions and services on their networks, like emergency services, so it is a very valid question. In that sense, Canonical stands behind being an open source first company. Our whole philosophy is in ensuring that an upstream piece of software is consumable. We do that through engineering and automation mostly. We ensure that things like OpenStack, Kubernetes, Etsy's OSM, and a host of others are both secure. They can be deployed in a best practice kind of HA/resilient way, and they can be scaled and lifecycle managed over the course of the TCO life of that cloud, right? And I think that's where the important bits come in. That's the difference between just using upstream software on a laptop under your desk versus taking upstream software and using it for its actual value and benefit in a production grade network. I know it's a little long-winded answer, but I mean it's really important to understand that there are serious consequences to not taking security, resilience, production grade and support seriously in a telco, right?
The next question is, what is necessary to build a simple mobile network?
Okay, that's
Telco and simple, really?
Well, starting from the simplest possible thing, if you want to build your own lab, if you're like a student or you want to start playing with things, the easiest possible thing which I can come up would be like a Blade RF type of hardware, which is basically serving you as like antenna and the device for being your radio unit. You can hook it up to an Intel NUC. Raspberry Pi would be probably not powerful enough, but a small Intel NUC would be good. And there you can deploy some open source EPC solution like Magma, for example, and then hooking it up to each other, you get a very simple, like a local mobile network. That's like the minimum setup on your desk which you can play with, and of course a 5G modem to be the receiver. However, whenever doing that kind of work, please take a look at your local regulations. In many countries it's not allowed to just broadcast signal in a, like whatever way you want. So in some of European countries you get special dedicated frequencies which you can use for experimentation or dedicated for startups. In US you have CBRS bands for citizens. So there are ways to do it, but just don't put some random frequency and start propagating power around your house, because that might catch some interest. If you go to one step higher, like if you want to build a simple private mobile network for I don't know, for a factory or for a small agricultural operation, this kind of things, you can also do it as well, like fully open source. There are many projects around RUCUDU, and basically there you need a little bit more sophisticated hardware, maybe like a simple setup on the edge with like, I don't know, 3 blades, and install their mass metal as a service so that you can address this piece of hardware via an API and create a Kubernetes cluster, for example, with microcase. Or if you want to deploy some VNFs, you can use LexD to create basically VMs or machine containers, and then you can deploy the same open source projects in a little bit bigger scale. That would be like the simplest things that I can think of, Arno.
Yeah, I think it depends on the use case and on what you're trying to achieve. If it's just checking out the technology, really just kicking the tires if you want, there are many ways to get going, right? I think importantly, like Maciej says, depending on what the outcome is you're after, there are many open source projects that can get you going. Even the substrates are no longer an issue. Anyone can stand up a Kubernetes, a small instance of Kubernetes, can stand up a single unit of Kubernetes through snaps, for instance, like a microcades, and that's sudo snap install microcades, and immediately you have a Kubernetes substrate which you can speak to an API from Kubernetes. You can put down some containerized workloads, and there's a lot of options there. I think dependent on what you're trying to achieve, if it's lab work versus mobile private network, small mobile private network for enterprise, there are different directions you can go in. I think what Canonical currently is doing is we've proven out the infra part of the puzzle, right? We've shown that substrates in itself, whether it's OpenStack, bare metal, KVM machines, microcades, or Kubernetes substrates, that's not where the value is. You don't need teams and teams of engineers to stand up an OpenStack anymore. Essentially, it's press the red button and let the modeling and automation do the hard work, figure out where placement of services are, how resilience works, things like that. I think for mobile private networks, the next challenge in the evolution path is really which upstream open source mobile packet cores or 5G cores and additional functions like the RAN component. Those two components probably the most important. But I've heard this week a couple of customers ask, like, so if I've stood up my mobile private network, what kind of services can I put down on that? Now, for us, it's a layer cake, right? So the infrastructure, the automation, lifecycle management, upgradability, all of that's an easy topic to solve, right? We've solved it many times over. Customers are happy. They understand that it is now an API call. Essentially, it's an automated model that does something complicated. I think for them, the next question is, if I take maybe Magma from Facebook, or I take 5GNS Core, or I take something else. I can stand it up, but if I want to run it in production, what does that look like? And Canonical is now taking on that challenge, right? That challenge of ensuring that when a mobile private network needs to be stood up as a service from a service provider, or whether it's a private company who wants to stand up a 3GPP type radio mobile service for their own customer, for their own users, that they have the ability to also press that red button and use the same tooling, the modeling, the automation to go and stand that up. And you will see announcements from Canonical in the coming months in terms of the types of 5G cores that we will support for mobile private use, and the partnerships to enable the radio side of this, the OpenRAN side of this specifically, right? We are in the alliances, the right alliances. Mathieu leads our efforts there. You have something to say about which alliances we're in, and what are we doing there, and how are we ensuring that Ubuntu makes it into the conversation?
Yeah, sure. So besides the ETSUSL that I mentioned earlier, we're also taking part in the discussion in like a tip community around open source projects there, also talking to OAI and many other communities. But I wanted to pick up on something that you said, because you mentioned about the automation, the use cases on top. Like one thing is the like business use cases and the value that you can bring with like your AI/ML solution or value-added services like push to talk or something like that. But there is also a huge area which is also seen as a like difficult to manage, which is the additional services that you need in a network. So you deploy your simple radio and you deploy your EPC, but again, like how to monitor it, how to gather logs, how to add this and that, like IT specific services. Thanks to the fact that we have already built like a nice charming ecosystem around Juju. This is as simple as doing like Juju relate my piece of software to Grafana and Prometheus to get some monitoring, to Jaeger or Logstash to get the Greylog to get audit trail and so on. There are like previously I remember times being like in a bigger telco specific companies where building an audit trail solution took like a year of several teams, and now you can do it with one command. So that's like something that I would encourage you to use. It's from the open source community, which you can very simply implement to whatever you're building.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's an interesting concept to look at, right? Like the ability to stand up a model of something complex is no longer a complicated thing. Yes, you have to understand a couple of basics in terms of abstraction, but once you understand how the general description works to stand up that complicated piece of software, whether it's OpenStack or Kubernetes or something else, then it's easy to deploy that model into a substrate. But like Mathieu says, the framework in itself, so the automation framework and approach that we take here, especially in our preparation towards operators or open operators and Kubernetes type challenges or management challenges, has seen us develop features that ensure that you describe a model of something complex which you deploy, and if you want to stand up 10 of them, all you have to do is you relate within that model it to another complex model, and in this case the logging, monitoring, alerting stack, or your Kafka bus or your Grafana instance, which is centrally located, will now have a hook into which that additional model that you're standing up, it just reaches out, it exchanges SSH keys, it configures that Kubernetes cluster into that LMA stack. So for us, those kind of primitives are essential when you do this at scale. This might be useful when you do big data center, but big data center is interesting in the fact that you can, in an easy way, still get familiar with automation, orchestration for the substrate part, for the infrastructure part. But I think it becomes essential for your operational costs just to keep that under control and make sure you don't have to grow out massive teams of operations people to be able to use those constructs at scale in highly distributed compute cases, right? Like if you look at networks out there, some service providers in large geos, in Russia for instance, they have up to 100,000 cell tower sites. if they had to go and deploy a type of use case where you required compute pools at each one of the cell tower sites, or even if they did a fraction of that, a quarter of the cell tower sites, they did local POPs and connected multiple towers to that for certain use cases where you would have to break out traffic or handle traffic at the edge. You're looking at a whole lot of sites that will need to be stood up, right? That standing up process no longer needs to be a manual process, it is now an API call. You have a higher level orchestration capability where you model and you push that model through an API call to a bare metal deployment capability. So I think those kind of constructs, it'll take some time to get, I would say, comfortable that you can do it this way. More and more customers see that benefit, and they actually get the cost savings and operational benefits of doing it in a different way. I think it'll just become more and more common day for us over the next couple of years.
Thank you. Another question is, what are the most important open source projects in telecom space right now?
Well, I wouldn't call anyone most important. They all have their place. Like in the category of infrastructure, I would be looking at both OpenStack and Kubernetes, and the stack that you mentioned about like MassLXD, MicroK, Ceph for the edge. If you look at the radio part, obviously, like everything that is under the OpenRAN projects, there are many initiatives around that, around RUCUDU and also non-real-time RIG. That's also interesting, and coming back from like that space a little bit up in the chain, then you get projects like OSM, which are doing the orchestration. You get the core part where you get starting from very simple IT-like setups like Magma, where it follows like the modern IT basically way of working coming from the Facebook team. But also you get projects like OMEC, which is rather turning into full 3GPP compliancy, having features like charging, billing, lawful interception, and so on. So depending on what you need, you can pick and choose. There is really like a variety of projects there. And I would say also that there are a lot of projects around like an IMS layer and telecom application server and value-added services that are on top. So a lot of choices.
I think it's an interesting question. Again, it comes down to what are you trying to achieve, right? Like if it's in the mobile space, maybe mobile private space, more likely. Depending on what's okay for you, what's good enough, right? Like we say, if you really want the more traditional 3GPP delineated functions within function blocks that will then integrate with other function blocks to essentially come up with a core, then obviously the OMAC route is very interesting. And absolutely Canonical is leaning in, right? We're investing heavily in the research and development and engineering efforts to enable the consumption of those upstream open source projects. You will just see more and more of this investment coming out over the course of the next months. But I mean, just standing up a core today, it's no longer a $1 million investment anymore. It's no longer a licensing agreement that sees you paying per subscriber, per user, and per megabit that you send through that core, right? Like the fact that there's exponential growth on the throughput in a 5G network as compared to an LTE network where it was already good enough, and the low latency factors that make 5G appealing for certain use cases. There is no longer that ultimate demand to have the perfect 5G core from a proprietary vendor, in as much as standing up that initial network and doing your work, right? So there's a lot of research and development, there's a lot of lab work, but there's also a lot of active and I would say serious efforts in terms of enabling and using the 5G primitives like slicing and cups and all of the different virtualization aspects of 5G as a networking service, and then going out and building the use cases that will come in as a service, right?
Yeah, not putting also like the proprietary vendors in the bad light, because actually a lot of them are reaching out to us because we have experience running like open source operations, and they are opening up their ecosystem as well. So there are a lot of initiatives coming out of big players which you would associate with like legacy type of networks, which are joining the OpenRAN wagon and also integrating, and like having RU from one big vendor and CU from another big vendor is not something uncommon anymore.
Yeah, I think it took a long time to come to the conclusion that open source is not a threat in as much as it's going to break down my revenue stream, my traditional business, but it is an enabling technology that will get you moving faster and evolve your own products faster, right? I mean, if you just look at like Intel's efforts in OpenRAN with the FlexRAN base, on top of which vendors build their product portfolio, it is enabling a lot more evolution for a lot more vendors, for many more vendors than you would see if it was all proprietary and secret and siloed off. And I think that's one of the big, I would say, things that I think we should still change in open source, right? A lot of people claim to be open source minded and community driven and good contributors into open source projects. And yet again, from time to time, I do see announcements where an alliance gets formed with a kind of exclusive club forming of only certain vendors or operators going into an alliance, and it's going to be open source based, but it is not going to be open source per se, right? Now, that type of behavior is maybe good if you wanted to achieve something short term, but if you wanted to continue benefiting from the open source project off of which you're basing your approach, you really want to ensure that you can continue to evolve with the release cadences of that OpenStream project. And if you are really creating benefit that will benefit a community of open source software, contribute it back into the community, right? There is no shame in saying you found something that could be done a better way in an open source community. Everyone will welcome it. I think the things we should do, companies like ourselves, where we have really big security teams, what we do, for instance, is we don't necessarily compete in the game of how many lines of code that we contribute into project X or project Y, but we look at the community, we look at the open source projects and software that they use, if they use Kafka Bus, if they use something else. We look at those aspects and we say, how can we make it better? Can we contribute the CVE patches for the security aspect of that? Can we help them deploy it in an easy way? Can we package it in a snap and make a development version of that available and supported? Can we do an at-scale version of that? Like, how do we enable our service provider customers who are actually supposed to benefit from this, from the work that we do in those communities? Wisdom?
Thank you. About Magma, we looked into it, but had troubles getting it set up. Do you have any recommendations there?
Well, first of all, if you have any trouble with any open source project, and in that case Magma, there is a Magma Slack channel with a very active community where you can ask questions about the installation. The next thing that you could do is basically follow up with the documentation, the guides, if you haven't looked there, because like from the recent version, from 1.5, the guides were improved a lot. So that would be one thing to try to look at as well.
Yeah, I mean, and feel free to reach out to the telco team in Canonical. We're always happy to help customers try and use open source software, because eventually you will come to the conclusion that it is fit for purpose or it is not for your use cases, and you will either move on or you will adopt it, right? And if through that collaboration, through that interaction, we can make it better, we can do something that will make it easier for other customers to use, we're obviously interested to help evolve that, right? It's really important in the sense that mobile private networks, it's not because it's a smaller, I would say, slice or a smaller deployment for a specific use case, that it is any less important to make it secure. And I'm happy to hear that Ubuntu is the base for many projects now, right? What was the recent one that went to an Ubuntu?
IGW.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I mean, slowly but surely you're seeing that the reason why Ubuntu is so popular and so widespread, like the most adopted Linux in the world, is because we do make a free version of Ubuntu available to anyone everywhere with the latest kernels and all of the feature sets without limitation of a license or some kind of barrier to use that innovative substrate, that's innovative OS, to go and build the next big thing, right? We would love to see the same access for someone in sub-Saharan Africa versus Silicon Valley when it comes to having the ability to go and build the next big product out there.
Thank you, Arno Maszek. Another question is, how is OpenRAN adoption going to grow in the next 2 to 3 years, and what are the major blockers on the way?
Where did you put the glass ball that we have? No.
So no crystal ball, but
No.
I think that the evolution will go in a way that, like, currently OpenRAN, besides a few examples, is mostly targeted for private mobile network setup. It doesn't mean that they are small, because these are like big oil and gas companies and pipelines running across like half of the continent. So I wouldn't say it's small, but it's still like not the main network today. But I see in a year or year and a half more and more experimentation coming, more and more companies getting into the mix. So I think that this will grow, but this is not something that will like outgrow the existing networks. As Arno mentioned earlier, most of them are like brownfield networks, and if someone today makes an investment and buys like a huge 5G rollout for the entire country, they will not swap it because OpenRAN is nice, new and sexy thing that everyone talks about, right?
Yeah, I think OpenRAN is interesting as a technology. It came up like fast and furious in the last, I don't know, like the hype is everywhere at the moment in the last year, I guess. And I'm pretty impressed though. I mean, we've seen RFX efforts or requests for proposals, requests for information for quite a few networks out there interested in the topic. Most of them still in the learning phase, trying to understand what it is, how they can use it, how they can leverage the technology. And I was quite impressed. I think today I read Deutsche Telekom announcing that their OpenRAN smart city or OpenRAN city is active, right? Like, and I remember that RFI was end of last year. It's fantastic that there is sustained effort and investment from major names in the industry to make OpenRAN an actual fact, right? And it's only through efforts like that where we actually go and put it in place and you actually try to use it that it becomes valuable, right? I think the limiting factor that I'm trying to sometimes understand is in terms of traditional radio, and when I say traditional, I mean before OpenRAN was a kind of a concept. There's a lot of features that enrich history of features within radio in 4G, in 3G and before, right? And although new vendors heavily focus on the mobile private network space for OpenRAN, and it is the right enabling technology for that because of all the right reasons and all the right buzzwords, I still think that OpenRAN will still be pushed by I would say the big innovators in the industry alongside the smaller players, like starting up with their OpenRAN only solutions. The reason for that is purely, I've heard a customer say the other day where they were analyzing and they said something along the lines of it's all good and well that they can do all the fancy new things, but what about all of this interoperability with the legacy type radio features that I need, right? And I think that's maybe where the difference will come in terms of how far do you deploy OpenRAN today versus maybe in 2 years' time when that feature parity has been met in the industry. But I salute the effort. I think it's fantastic. I think we're going to see a lot of innovative type use cases come in. I think it'll most likely again be maybe somewhere in Europe or the US where you see or Asia, right? Like see the initial OpenRAN deployments hitting. I mean, obviously one of the most innovative service providers are out in Japan, right? But yeah, interesting times for RAN, right?
Thank you, Arno and Maszek. I think this is all for the questions.
Okay. ask us anything? Like how long do we have? Maybe we wait 5 more minutes, and
So
anyone on the call, a
Yeah.
topic that you would like to deep dive on, even something we didn't discuss yet today?
And during the waiting time, I have few announcements. So first of all, together with Arno, we are hiring. So as we have seen, we are putting a lot of investment in growth of telco and like open source in telecom space. So both field engineering and like R&D. Looking for people all the time, smart people. So
Yeah, I was told by our recruitment team that we were looking for unicorns. I took it as a compliment that the people that we have in place at Canonical today, who have that unique combination of really advanced telco knowledge and the understanding of what it means, how important it is for open source software to influence telecommunications evolution in the future, that we have people like that. But we would welcome anyone, anywhere, who feel that they can make a contribution in the open source space. Specifically in the telco side, I'm pretty biased. Running the telco business, it's important for me to grow that out for Canonical. I think it's very important that we find more good people. We are a work from home company, so you can be located anywhere you want as long as you have a laptop and a good internet connection. You're welcome, and we look forward to your applications. I don't know if we could paste maybe the link to the careers page in the chat, so that people who are looking to maybe who are interested to see the open roles at Canonical can have a look at that. I think one of the most urgent ones we're really trying to expand the team on is the I would say the telco engineering team, who will be focusing on that automation, orchestration, problem sets from an engineering perspective, right? We're trying to grow that team fast and get some value down quickly.
Okay, so announcement number 2, we're waiting for questions. So in September, Etsy is hosting a VNF onboarding hackfest, and this will be all about integration of OSM with OAI, OpenRAN interface, and also putting OSM in a position of a non-real-time rig. So this is a great initiative that could change a lot in how all the projects integrate together and how to build like more complete and feature-rich setups. So definitely, if you are interested in that topics, feel free to join. It's like a 1 week exercise with mentoring, completely free, open to anyone. So again, I'd like to invite you to do that one.
Yeah, and seeing that we have a captive audience anyway now, I might as well say I'm looking for customers who want to do innovative projects on use cases to speed up things like 5G adoption or rollout projects, where you feel that either your own teams require a little bit of help in terms of thinking through difficult problem sets in this new world we live in, where everything is orchestrated, automated, but also in specific use cases we have technologies that can enable 5G adoption, or at least help accelerate 5G adoption in countries where the average revenue per user is low, and then what that looks like in terms of ensuring that the OPEX numbers, the operational expenses for running a network at scale with the right technologies is at the optimal cost points, right? So we're very eager to help customers the world over, whether you're looking for one cloud or many more. We will help you and enable you.
Thank you very much. The last question is, will Ubuntu have RT kernel, real-time kernel?
That's an interesting question. We've seen the need for real-time kernel quite a couple of times, and Maciek and I, we've been debating this, I would say for the last 12 months, right? Like, we've seen the request come in quite a few times. We have a meeting with a customer and they say, do you have real-time kernel? And we say, oh no, we don't have a real-time kernel, we have a low latency kernel, and we have the ability to do things like preemptive modules and things like that in the kernel. And always the conversation like dies very quickly when you go like, what do you need the real timeness of the kernel for, right? I think I think certain companies who had a real-time kernel did an exceptional marketing campaign, and they did a really good job in forcing this as one of the things you need if you're a telco and you're running Linux. Obviously, there are technical reasons why you need a real-time kernel, but we've done, Maciej and I have done a deep dive over the last a number of months where we looked at the problem set, we looked at the reasons why people think they need real-time kernel, and in most of the cases they don't really need real-time kernel. Real-time kernel is a exceptionally valuable thing in certain use cases, and in specifically the telco part of this, real-time kernel is an important part in the radio network, right? In certain units within that, I would say layer cake or architecture, you need real-time processing. So Canonical has made the decision to launch a real-time kernel in the 2204 LTS. A number of selected partners have already been given early access to that pre-GA real-time kernel. And we're working behind the scenes with pretty big names in the industry for specifically the radio use cases, really big partners to essentially move that real-time kernel work forward. The initial versions of that real-time kernel is promising, but we look forward to evolving it to the point where it can actually be deployed in production networks at scale. Anything to add, Maciej?
No, that's like a nice and comprehensive answer for that one.
Okay. Did we get any other questions, Bizan?
No, that's all for now.
Right.
Okay.
Well, if you're at Mobile World Congress, there's still a day and a couple of hours left. Feel free to reach out to us, and we'd be happy to see you in the meeting room or on the floor.